Good evening, I'm Linord Moudou. This is Africa 54. Benson McCurry is off today. We begin in Vienna, where after 2 years of negotiations, Iran and 6 world powers have struck a landmark nuclear deal aimed at preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons in exchange for lifting international sanctions that have crippled the Iranian economy and, in many ways, isolated the nation. VOA's Heather Murdock is in Vienna and has our report.
From Iran, the United States, China, Russia, Germany, France, Britain, and the European Union announced Tuesday that after years of talks, they finally had a deal. Officials called it the good deal that all sides have been seeking.
Our quarrel has never been with the Iranian people. And we realize how deeply the nuclear-related sanctions have affected the lives of Iranians. Thanks to the agreement reached today, that will begin to change. In return for the dramatic changes that Iran has accepted for its nuclear program.
Kerry says without the deal, Iran was just a few months away from having enough nuclear material to build 10 bombs. But under the agreement, he says, it will be a decade before Iran will have enough material to build 1 bomb within a year. Iran insists its nuclear program always has been and always will be peaceful.
Iran reaffirms that under no circumstances will Iran ever seek, develop, or acquire any nuclear weapons.
But world leaders still fear rising tensions in the Middle East and fear that mistrust between Iran and rivals like Saudi Arabia and Israel could lead to a military conflict if Iran builds a nuclear arsenal.
Put simply, no deal means a greater chance of more war in the Middle East. Moreover, we give nothing up by testing whether or not this problem can be solved peacefully.
Critics in both the U.S. and Iran say the deal will empower the other side. Diplomats now face the task of selling the deal at home. Secretary of State Kerry calls some suggested alternatives to the deal, such as piling on sanctions against Iran until Tehran capitulates to international demands regarding its nuclear program, a fantasy. Heather Murdock, VOA News, Vienna.
As Heather Murdock mentioned, the Middle East has jitters over the Iran deal, namely Saudi Arabia and Israel. Just a short time ago, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressed his displeasure over the agreement.
The capacity to produce many nuclear bombs, in fact, an entire nuclear arsenal with the means to deliver it. What a stunning, historic mistake.
And joining us now live via Skype from Vienna is VOA's Victoria Macchi. Good evening, Victoria. What are the key points of this landmark nuclear deal?
We haven't actually seen the full text yet. The EU's Federica Mogherini did say that would be released today. It's about 100 pages. The most important points that as far as we understand right now, are that this does prolong Iran's ability to develop their nuclear program, and it does also give them in return lifting of certain sanctions, not all sanctions, but enough that they were actually able to get to the table and decide this very early this morning here in Vienna.
Now, the deal culminates 20 months of negotiations. Do you have some insight as to how they were able to reach it this time around?
I've only been here in Vienna since last week, but really in the last, the days I've been here, it is a lot of hard work sitting around a negotiating table. From what we can tell, this has been day and night. John Kerry meeting every permutation of these groups between Iran and the EU and Russia and China to be able to get everybody on the same page with an agreement. It really just seems like it was all of that time spent closed up in the hotel here in Vienna that was able to produce this.
Now, what is the next step after this? The UN Security Council is to ratify the deal, perhaps sometimes next week. What can you tell us?
So the UN Security Council does need to, and so do the Parliament in Tehran, and also in Washington, Congress needs to take a look at this. They have 60 days to review it. So, John Kerry and President Obama, they both said that they did not think there were going to be any problems, any hurdles. They were pretty confident in the deal that they have. But, Congress has been very, very opposed to this in Washington. So, it remains to be seen whether they're actually going to be able to pull it off on the home front in both locations. But the leaders of both countries seem to feel that it is a very strong possibility.
Now, there have been some mixed reactions about this agreement. Tell us what you are witnessing in Vienna about this.
Here in Vienna, really, the mixed reactions, I think we've only seen one very, very small protest here in Vienna. It was a group of American tourists who were chanting, they were here on vacation. They went to the site of the talks and they were chanting, no deal, bad deal. But other than that, it's been pretty calm here. A lot of Iranian journalists here very, very excited to see what was happening. By and large, the international front, obviously a lot more a lot more hesitation among some parties. But here in Vienna, it really just everyone we've talked to felt like this was a hard work that paid off.
Okay, Victoria, thank you so much for joining us from Vienna. And VOA's Victoria Macchi reporting live via Skype from Vienna, Austria. And for more analysis on the nuclear deal, I'm joined by Cal Perry, host of VOA's Hashtag program and a former international correspondent. Cal, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
So some people call it a historic deal, and Israel Prime Minister calls it a historic mistake. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so that gives you a great sort of range of the opinions that we're going to hear over the next 2 months. And as Victoria sort of alluded to, now the selling begins. People have to sell this in Washington. They have to sell this in Tehran. And that's what we're seeing now. We're starting to see really bartering over this deal. There's two ways to look at this deal. It's a diplomatic deal and it's a business deal. And I think we're hearing those opinions start to come out.
So who are the big winners here, really?
Well, I think if you're a European country and you're looking to do business with Iran, you're a big winner. If you're Israel and you're scared about what they call the Iranian tentacles, specifically Hezbollah, Hamas, then you could classify yourself as a loser. I think one of the big winners here is not only American businesses, but the Iranian people who've lived under these sanctions now for 3 decades. For somebody like me, 35 years since we've had any kind of relationship with Iran, the United States, I think people are intrigued by that. People want to know what's next. Are we going to see a wider opening like we've seen between the U.S. and Cuba? I think that's a big question. Big question indeed. Now, President Obama said that this deal is basically not built on trust, but built on verification. What does this mean? Right, so he's hearkening back to John F. Kennedy's talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis and dealing with Russia and trust but verify. And he's playing off of that language. For this president, this could be a legacy. And that can cut both ways. If the deal falls apart in the next month or two, which could still happen, absolutely, or if he's not able to push it through Congress, that could reflect negatively on his legacy. But if this deal sticks, this is his legacy. He can hang his hat on this foreign policy victory. So I think he's hedging his bets a little bit, but he's also putting out there that this is, in his mind, a historic deal. So give us some perspective on how we move from signing this agreement to implementing it. What will it take, or what does it entail? So now all eyes are going to turn first to the UN Security Council. They'll pass this. That's going to be kind of a rubber stamp. Okay. Then the U.S. Congress. That's a big question. And then the IAEA. I think when the rubber meets the road here, to use an American saying, it's going to be about inspections. Will the IAEA be able to freely go into Iran and inspect facilities that it wants to with little or no warning? There's a 15-day waiting period written into the agreement in case this comes up, in case there's a difficulty. That'll be the first test when the IAEA says we want to visit this site, whether or not the Iranian government lets them in. Now let's talk quickly about what it means for Iran. How soon will the sanctions be lifted? What will it take? What type of commitment from the country? So the American sanctions are going to have to wait for the U.S. Congress. But when the UN Security Council votes on this next week, we could see some European countries starting to lift their sanctions. And make no mistake about it, there are European countries that are desperate to do business in Iran. It's a whole new market. It's a market that's just going to open up. There are countries around the world. So I think we're going to start to see business taking traction in places like Tehran, places like Isfahan, and then in the months to come, we could see U.S. sanctions finally being lifted. So quickly, what next? So we're going to have to wait and see what the U.S. Congress does. And keep in mind, it's presidential election season here in the U.S., so it might not be very pretty, but it'll be politics 101. Well, we'll be keeping an eye on it. Thank you so much, Cal.